Dear God, there's a baby in that trash bin. Oh my God, she's not moving at all. The words tore out of Isabella Reyes before she could stop them. It was pouring rain, a freezing storm that turned the Chicago night into a gray blur. Isabella had just lifted the heavy metal lid of the dumpster behind the kitchen when she saw her. There she was, Emma Valente, only 7 months old, lying motionless among black garbage bags and rotting food, wrapped only in a thin, dirty blanket, her tiny body so still it looked like a discarded doll. For a moment, Isabella's soul felt as though it had dropped straight through the soles of her worn sneakers. No, 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 she whispered, reaching into the filth without a second thought. Baby, don't you give up. Not out here. Not like this. The infant was ice cold, her skin turning blue, her lips pale as death, not even a whimper escaping her tiny mouth. Isabella pulled her out with trembling hands, immediately tearing open her own shirt and pressing the baby against her bare chest, skin to skin, desperate to transfer her body heat to the freezing child. She wrapped her coat around both of them, shielding the infant from the rain. I have to get you inside, Isabella gasped, feeling the terrifyingly weak flutter of the baby's heartbeat against her chest as she turned to run back to the house. Help! Someone help! I found her! But before she could reach the back door, a scream cut through the storm. What are you doing? Karen Mitchell, the nanny, stood under the patio lights, her face twisted in a mask of horror. Oh my God! You were throwing her away! Help! Guards! She's kidnapping the baby. Isabella's blood turned to ice. What? No, I found her in the bin. I just pulled her out, liar, Karen shrieked. I saw you. You put her in the trash because she wouldn't stop crying. Within seconds, 4 armed guards surrounded Isabella, guns drawn. The younger one ripped Emma from her arms, and the baby, startled from the warmth of Isabella's chest, let out a weak, pitiful cry that sounded more like a dying kitten than a human child. Don't move, bitch. Please, listen to me, Isabella begged, raising her trembling, dirt-stained hands, her shirt still torn open, her skin smeared with filth. She was freezing. She wasn't even breathing when I found her. She needs a doctor. Look at her skin. Shut up! A guard struck her across the face. Isabella staggered, falling into the mud, tasting blood, but nothing prepared her for the presence that emerged from the mansion. Adrian Valente stepped into the rain like death itself, tall, broad, dressed in a black shirt, his eyes scanning the scene with a rage so cold it stopped her heart. Emma. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of an earthquake. He took his daughter from the guard. The infant was limp, smelling of rain and refuse, her tiny fists clenched weakly, her eyes half closed. Adrian's jaw clenched so hard a vein pulsed in his temple as he saw the filth smeared on his daughter's onesie, as he felt how cold her little body was. Then he looked at Isabella. You! He growled, his voice dropping to something inhuman. Isabella stepped back instinctively, mud and garbage juice staining her torn uniform, her whole body shaking. Mr. Valente, please. I went to empty the trash. I found her inside. I saved her. Don't you speak. He handed Emma to Dante and stormed toward Isabella. His voice didn't boom. It sliced, controlled, lethal. You treated my daughter like garbage? You threw my flesh and blood into a dumpster? She's just a baby. She can't even cry for help. No, sir. I swear on my life. The slap came without warning. Isabella's head snapped to the side, pain exploding across her cheek. She fell to her knees on the wet gravel, gasping. Sir, please. Adrian grabbed her by the hair, forcing her to look up at him. His eyes held nothing but murder. I've killed men for less than looking at my family wrong. And you put my 7-month-old daughter in the trash like she was nothing? A helpless infant who can't even call for her father. Tears streamed down Isabella's face, mixing with the rain and mud. I saved her. I swear to God, I saved her. I held her against my chest to keep her warm. Enough. He released her with a shove that sent her sprawling into the dirt. Dante. A tall man in a dark suit stepped forward. Dante Moretti, Adrian's right hand, his expression unreadable, the baby now cradled carefully in his arms. Take her to the basement, Adrian ordered, his back already turned as he took Emma back from Dante, holding his daughter close, feeling her faint heartbeat. I'll deal with her after I know my daughter is safe. No, Isabella screamed, scrambling to her feet. Please, Mr. Valente, I didn't do this. Check the cameras. Check. A guard grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back. Pain shot through her shoulder. The cameras were off, Dante said quietly. Someone disabled them 30 minutes ago. Adrian froze. Then he turned, slowly, and looked at Isabella with something worse than rage. Suspicion confirmed. Interesting timing, he said softly. Take her. Now. Please. Isabella fought against the guards, but they were too strong. I have a sister. She's sick. She needs me. I would never hurt a child. Please, someone believe me. No one answered. They dragged her across the lawn, her bare feet scraping against stone and grass, her soaked, torn uniform clinging to her trembling body. Every breath felt like swallowing glass. Please, she whispered, her voice breaking. Please, just listen. They shoved her down a flight of stairs and into a cold, dark basement. The door slammed. The lock clicked. Darkness swallowed her whole. Isabella collapsed onto the concrete floor, hugging herself against the cold. Her cheek throbbed. Her arm ached. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst. She curled into herself, a position she knew too well from childhood. From the orphanage, from the years of being blamed for things she didn't do, beaten for crimes she didn't commit. Not again, she whispered into the dark. Please, God, not again. Somewhere above, she heard Emma's weak, pitiful cries, the sound of a baby too exhausted and cold to truly scream. And despite everything, despite the terror, despite the pain, one thought rose above the rest. That little girl is alive, and I saved her. Even if no one believes me, I saved her. Then footsteps echoed down the stairs. Heavy, deliberate. The lock clicked open. Adrian Valente stood in the doorway, a gun in his hand, his face carved from stone. Now, he said quietly, you're going to tell me exactly what you were doing near my daughter's room tonight, and if I don't like your answer, he raised the gun. No one will ever find your body. Isabella looked up at him, shaking, bleeding, but somehow still breathing. I saved her, she said, her voice barely a whisper, and one day, you'll know the truth. You'll have to live with what you did to me tonight. For a split second, something flickered in Adrian's eyes. Doubt, confusion, but it vanished as quickly as it came. He stepped into the darkness, and the door closed behind him. If Isabella's courage moved you, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Stay with me, because what happens next will leave you breathless. Adrian stepped into the dark basement, the door slamming shut behind him like the lid of a coffin being sealed. The only light came from a single bare bulb overhead, flickering and swaying slightly, casting ghost-like shadows across his face, a face as cold as ice. Isabella shrank into the corner, her back pressed to a damp, mold-stained wall, her whole body still soaked through and shaking without pause, her torn shirt still exposing the skin she had used to warm the baby. Her eyes locked on the gun in Adrian's hand, the black muzzle like a dead man's eye staring straight at her. Speak, Adrian said, his voice frigid and unhurried, as if he had the entire night to break her. From the beginning, and if I hear even one lie, he did not have to finish. The gun finished for him. Isabella swallowed hard, her throat raw and dry, like swallowing sand. I was taking out the trash, she began, her voice trembling but fighting to stay steady. Around 11 at night, I went to empty the kitchen waste. I heard a faint sound coming from the large metal bin, so weak I almost missed it. At first I thought it was a stray animal, but when I lifted the lid, I saw her lying there, not moving, barely breathing. She was ice cold. I pulled her out and pressed her against my chest, skin to skin, to transfer my body heat. That is the only way to save a baby from hypothermia. Adrian stared at her without blinking. His face looked carved from stone, not a single trace of feeling. That is a good story, he said, his tone sharp with a bitter kind of mockery. Too perfect, too complete, like you rehearsed it 100 times. I am not making it up, Isabella almost screamed, desperation tearing through her. Why would I hurt a baby? A 7-month-old who cannot even cry for help? What have I ever done to you? I am just the maid. Adrian stepped closer, the soles of his shoes cracking against the concrete like war drums. He bent down until his face was only inches from hers, his hot breath washing over her skin. How does a maid know how to treat infant hypothermia? Isabella blinked, the question catching her off guard and tangling her thoughts. I used to work in a nursing home, she said, her voice shrinking. 3 years. I was trained in CPR and emergency care because a lot of the elderly there had strokes or went into cardiac arrest. We also had training for infant emergencies. It was mandatory. Adrian's brow tightened, a flicker of surprise crossing his eyes before it vanished. Convenient, he said. A maid who just happens to know infant emergency care. Just happens to check the trash at the right moment. Just happens to save my daughter. You can check my records, Isabella said, her voice gaining a harder edge now, even as fear still choked her chest. Sunrise Nursing Home on the south side of Chicago. I worked there from the age of 22 to 25. They have my emergency care certificate. At that moment, the basement door opened. Dante walked in, his face still expressionless, but something had shifted in his eyes. He leaned in and murmured a few words into Adrian's ear. Isabella saw Adrian's shoulders go rigid, his jaw clenched tight. "What?" Adrian snapped, turning to Dante, his voice razor cold. "The doctor just finished checking her." "Boss," Dante said, loud enough for Isabella to hear. "She has severe hypothermia. Her core temperature was dangerously low. The doctor said if she had been out in that cold 5 minutes longer, her organs would have started shutting down. For a baby that young." He paused, his voice dropping. 1 or 2 more minutes and she would have been dead. The doctor also found traces of sedatives in her blood. Someone drugged her before putting her in that bin. He did not finish, but the silence that followed was heavier than any words. Isabella let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding, a thin thread of hope sparking in her chest. "You see? She really almost died. I saved her. I held her against my body to keep her alive. I have no reason to hurt her at all." But Adrian did not turn back to look at her. He stood there with his back to her, his shadow stretching across the concrete like a black tower. When he spoke again, his voice was still steel cold. "Someone still shut off the cameras," he said slowly. 30 minutes before she was found in the bin. "That person has high-level access. And you," he turned, his deep black eyes cutting straight through her, as if he could read every thought inside her skull. "You could be an accomplice. Maybe someone hired you to do this. You threw her away. Then you play the hero who saves her." "No," Isabella screamed, tears spilling out. "I do not know anything about the cameras. I do not have any access code. I do not even know the Wi-Fi password in this house." Adrian watched her for a long time, the silence pressing down until it felt impossible to breathe. Then he turned to Dante. "Call the police," he said, his voice like a death sentence. "Hand her over to them. Attempted murder of a Mafia boss's infant daughter." He walked toward the door without looking back. "She will rot in prison." The police car came to a stop in front of Cook County Jail at nearly 4 in the morning. Isabella was yanked out, her hands cuffed tight behind her back, her maid's uniform still damp and torn, reeking of sour garbage and rain, mixed with the metallic stink of dried blood on her lips. She staggered forward between 2 officers, her bare feet scraped and raw against the dead-cold concrete. Inside, the fluorescent lights burned so harshly they made her eyes ache after so many hours buried in the basement dark. Intake unfolded like a nightmare with no waking point. They took her fingerprints, photographed her with a number placard pressed against her chest, and confiscated everything she carried, including the cheap bracelet Lucia had given her for her birthday last year. A heavy-set female guard with a face as cold as loose change tossed her an orange jail uniform and barked an order. "Change." 2 minutes. Isabella peeled off the soaking clothes, her hands shaking so badly she could barely manage the buttons. When she was led into the holding area, a murmur rose like surf. "That's her." A shrill woman's voice sliced through from somewhere. The one who tried to kill Valente's baby girl. Isabella kept her head down, forcing herself not to look at anyone, but she could feel dozens of eyes drilling into her back. They shoved her into a shared cell with 5 other women. The moment she stepped inside, the steel door slammed shut behind her. Less than 10 seconds later, a punch from behind sent her sprawling face first onto the concrete. "Trash," someone snarled. A large woman with tattoos crawling up and down her arms grabbed Isabella by the hair and hauled her upright. "You think you can touch a baby? A 7-month-old infant? People like you don't deserve to live." Isabella barely had time to register what was happening before the second blow landed, a kick driving into her stomach. She folded in on herself, air gone, lungs refusing. Then the third. The fourth. Savage laughter rippled around her while she writhed on the floor, arms over her head, trying to protect her face. Blood streamed from her nose, mixing with tears and grit. And in that instant of pain, memory burst through her like floodwater. Isabella was back in the dim room at St. Mary's Orphanage, where the matron had lashed her with a leather belt over something that had gone missing, something Isabella had never taken. She felt again what it was to be 7 years old, curled tight in a corner, crying without sound, wondering why she was being punished for a crime she did not commit. 20 years later, she was still paying for sins that were never hers. "Enough," a curt voice snapped. The blows stopped. Isabella pried her eyes open and saw a female guard standing beyond the bars, her face blank and indifferent. She did not step in to intervene. She only watched, as if she were enjoying a cheap show. "Go to sleep," she said, and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the empty corridor. That night, Isabella lay curled on the lowest bunk, every breath a knife sliding in and out of her ribs. She did not dare sob out loud, letting the tears seep silently into the thin pillow. In the dark, she thought of Lucia, her little sister lying in their cramped apartment on the south side, her fragile heart beating in uneven, frightened pulses, waiting for a surgery that now would never come. $200,000. A number Isabella had been scraping together for 5 years, and still she was only halfway there. And now, here in jail with an attempted murder charge hanging over her, she knew every hope had dissolved into smoke. "I'm sorry, Lucia," she whispered into the dark. "I broke my promise." Suddenly, a hand touched her shoulder. Isabella jerked around, her heart hammering. A middle-aged woman with graying hair sat on the bunk beside her, eyes glinting in the darkness. "Hey, kid," the woman whispered, her voice rough and thick as if she had smoked her whole life. "I'll give you a piece of free advice." Isabella said nothing, only stared. The woman leaned closer, her breath heavy with the stench of cheap cigarettes against Isabella's face. "Valente bought this whole jail," she said, each word punching into Isabella's chest. "The guards, the inmates, even the warden, all of them belong to him." She paused, a half-smile creeping across her wrinkled face. "You're not going to live long enough to see your court date, kid." 3 days inside the jail passed like 3 years. Isabella survived each hour by avoiding every gaze, pressing herself into whatever corner she could find, and swallowing her tears back down her throat each night. The bruises on her body had shifted from purple to a deep blue-black, and every movement throbbed as if 1,000 needles were being driven into her flesh. But no physical pain compared to what she felt when she saw Lucia walk into the visiting room. Her sister was thinner than the last time Isabella had seen her, her cheeks sunken, her skin pale as paper, moving slowly with a labored breath that seemed to weigh on her chest. Lucia sat on the other side of the dividing glass, lifted the internal phone, and tears immediately spilled over. "Sister," Lucia sobbed, her voice breaking through the receiver. "Look at you. What did they do to you? Your face." Isabella raised a hand to touch the bruise along her cheekbone and forced a smile. "It's okay, sweetheart. I just fell. It looks worse than it really is." "Don't lie to me," Lucia cried harder. "I know they beat you. I know everything. Why is this happening? You didn't do anything wrong." Isabella swallowed, her throat clenched tight. She wanted to cry, to scream that she was terrified to the point of dying, that she might never leave this place. But when she looked into her sister's reddened eyes, she knew she was not allowed to break. "Listen to me," Isabella said, fighting to keep her voice calm. "Everything is going to be okay. I didn't do anything wrong, and the truth will come out. I just need you to stay strong. Take your medicine on time, and wait for me to come home." Lucia shook her head, tears falling in steady streams. "You don't understand," the doctor said. "The doctor said I only have 2 months if I don't get the surgery." Isabella's heart clenched as if someone had wrapped a fist around it. 2 months. 60 days. And she was locked in a cell on an attempted murder charge. No bail, no lawyer, no hope. "Lucia, I'm not afraid to die," Lucia said, her voice trembling but straining for courage. "I'm only afraid you'll be alone. I'm afraid no one will take care of you when I'm gone." "Don't say that," Isabella ground out. And at last, the tears broke free. "You're going to be okay. I promise. I'll find a way. Visiting time is over." The guard's cold voice cut through them like a blade. Lucia stood and pressed her hand to the glass. Isabella lifted her own hand to the matching spot, feeling only the chill of the barrier instead of the warmth of her sister's skin. "I love you," Lucia whispered. "I love you too." Then Lucia was led away, her small, fragile figure disappearing behind the door. Isabella stayed seated for a few seconds, head bowed, tears dropping onto the metal table. She thought they would take her back to the cell, but the guard escorted her somewhere else. An interrogation room with metal chairs, a metal table, and walls the color of old ash. Waiting inside was a black woman in her early 50s, short hair streaked with salt and pepper, wearing a gray blazer with a police badge clipped to her belt. Her eyes were sharp, But unlike the others Isabella had met, they were not cruel. "Sit down," the woman said, steady and controlled. "I'm Detective Maria Santos. I'm in charge of investigating your case." Isabella sat, wary. "I already told the police everything. I don't have anything else to say." Detective Santos opened a case file and turned a few pages. "I'm not here to listen to you repeat your statement. I'm here because something about Karen Mitchell's story doesn't add up." Isabella lifted her head, her heart beating faster. "What did you say?" "She says she saw you throwing the baby into the dumpster," Detective Santos said slowly, watching Isabella's reaction. "But according to the doctor's report, the infant was pressed against your bare chest when she was found. There were traces of your body heat preserving hers, skin-to-skin contact that kept her alive. If you meant to throw her away, why would you pull her out, tear open your own shirt, and hold her against your body to keep her warm?" Isabella said nothing, only stared at Detective Santos with a look that held hope and suspicion at the same time. "I need you to answer a few questions," Detective Santos continued. "Why were you working for the Valente family? Did you have any grudge against them?" "No," Isabella answered immediately. "I only needed the money. My sister has a congenital heart condition and she needs surgery urgently. The job at the Valente estate paid more than anywhere else I've ever worked. That's the only reason." Detective Santos nodded and wrote in her notebook. "Did you know anyone in the Valente family before you worked there?" "No. I applied through a staffing agency. I had never even spoken to Mr. Valente directly until that night." Detective Santos studied her for a long moment, eyes weighing something unseen. Then she stood, closed her notebook, and said, "I'll keep investigating." But before she left the room, she paused at the doorway and looked back. Her voice dropped, almost to a whisper. The security cameras were shut off from inside the house 30 minutes before it happened. Whoever did it had a high-level access code, the kind only family members and management-level staff are given. She held Isabella's gaze. "You don't have that code, do you?" Isabella shook her head, her pulse pounding. "No, I'm just the maid. I'm not even allowed in the main bedroom wing." Detective Santos nodded slowly, a strange glint passing through her eyes. "That's what I thought," she said, and walked out, leaving Isabella sitting there with her heart racing and a thread of hope as thin and fragile as a strand of sky silk. A scream tore through the quiet night inside the Valente estate. Not a scream, exactly, but something worse, a high-pitched, desperate wail that only a terrified infant could make. Adrian jolted upright, barefoot, sprinting down the hallway toward Emma's nursery. When he burst in, his 7-month-old daughter was thrashing in her crib, her tiny face drenched in tears, her eyes wide with terror, her small fists flailing at invisible demons. "Baby, baby." Adrian reached down and pulled her into his arms, feeling her small body shaking violently against his chest. "I'm here. You're safe. It's okay." But Emma would not stop crying. She arched her back, pushing against him, her wails growing louder, more frantic, as if his touch brought no comfort at all. Adrian tried everything, rocking her, humming, walking around the room, but nothing worked. The baby screamed until her voice grew hoarse, until her little body was drenched in sweat. This was the 4th night in a row. Every night the same screaming, crying, inconsolable terror, and the part that unsettled him most was what the new nanny had told him that morning. "She keeps reaching for the door, sir," the nanny had said nervously. "Every time someone walks in, she looks up like she's expecting someone else, and when it's not that person, she cries harder." Adrian held Emma tighter, his chest feeling as if something sharp had been driven straight through it. He remembered the night it happened, how when the guards had ripped Emma from Isabella's arms, the baby had let out that same desperate cry, as if being torn from the only safety she knew. Victims don't cling to the person who hurt them. A 7-month-old doesn't know how to pretend. So then, he finally got Emma to sleep by sheer exhaustion, her tiny body going limp against his chest, her breathing still hitching with the echoes of sobs. He laid her gently in the crib, and even in sleep, her small hand reached out toward nothing, fingers grasping at empty air. He went downstairs to his study, where Dante was already waiting with a thick file in his hands. "Background checks complete, boss," Dante said, setting the file on the desk. "On Isabella Reyes." Adrian sat and opened it. Each page felt like a slap across his face. Isabella Maria Reyes, 27, born in Chicago, orphaned at 7, raised in St. Mary's Orphanage until she turned 18, worked at Sunrise Nursing Home for 3 years, highly rated for diligence and dedication, trained in emergency care, including infant CPR and hypothermia treatment. then moved into domestic work for wealthy families to earn higher pay. Reason: supporting her sister Lucia Reyes, 22, born with a congenital heart condition, urgently needing surgery costing $200,000. No criminal record, no history of violence, no ties to any enemies of the Valente family. She's completely clean, Dante said quietly. No motive, no violent past, nothing. Just a poor girl trying to save her sister. Adrian slammed the file shut, jaw clenched so hard it ached. Something was wrong, something he had missed. "Brother," a familiar voice called from the doorway. Marcus Valente walked in, his usual smile fixed in place, his expensive suit without a single wrinkle. Adrian's younger brother had always been the picture of polished perfection, but tonight Adrian watched him with different eyes. "I heard the baby had another episode," Marcus said, dropping into the chair across from him without being invited. "Poor little thing. That's heavy trauma for someone so young." "She'll be fine," Adrian answered curtly. "Oh, by the way," Marcus leaned forward, voice lowering, "I heard that Maid is still alive in jail. You should finish it. Kill her. Make an example out of anyone who thinks they can touch the Valente family." Adrian stared at him, saying nothing. "Think about it," Marcus went on. "Letting her live only creates problems. She could talk to the cops, she could cause a scandal, kill her, bury her somewhere, and it's done." "Why are you so eager?" Adrian asked, his voice ice cold. Marcus blinked, briefly startled. "What?" "I asked why you're so eager to see that girl dead. She didn't do anything to you." "I'm just looking out for you," Marcus said quickly, the smile still there but his eyes flickering. "Looking out for Emma, looking out for our family." Adrian didn't answer, only nodded slowly. Marcus stayed a few minutes more, talking business, then stood to leave. Before he went, he stopped by Emma's nursery, stood over her crib with a face full of concern, then finally walked out. When the sound of Marcus's car faded into the distance, Adrian turned to Dante. "Pull up the security feed from Emma's nursery." Dante did. The video appeared on the laptop screen. Marcus stepped into Emma's nursery, smiling bright, voice sweet as syrup, cooing at the baby in her crib. But when Emma turned her face away, uninterested in his presence, Marcus's face changed completely. The smile vanished, replaced by something cold and disgusted. He looked at the infant the way you look at an obstacle, something you hate. His hand hovered over the crib for a moment, fingers twitching, before he pulled back. Then when the nanny entered the room, the smile snapped right back onto his mouth as if it had never left. Adrian stared at the screen, the blood in his veins turning to ice. "Dante," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "I want you to start over. I want every single person who was in that estate that night investigated again from the beginning." He turned to Dante, his deep black eyes burning like live coals, including Karen, including Marcus. Dante Moretti did not sleep for 3 nights straight. He sat in the hidden room beneath the estate's basement, surrounded by computer monitors, thick files, and a cup of coffee gone cold and bitter. Adrian's order had been crystal clear: investigate everyone, and Dante never did anything halfway. He started with Karen Mitchell. On the surface, she was the perfect nanny, 29 years old, a childcare credential from a well-regarded college, a spotless record, recommended by a reputable agency. But when Dante dug into her bank activity, the facade began to crack. 1 week before the fateful night, Karen's account suddenly received $50,000, an enormous amount for a nanny earning less than $4,000 a month. Dante traced the money, followed its trail through 3 intermediary accounts, until he found the source, a company called Blackstone Holdings LLC. The name made Dante frown. He had heard it somewhere before. He went deeper, tore through corporate records, and his heart seemed to stall when the answer finally surfaced. Blackstone Holdings LLC was a shell company, one of dozens used to launder money and hide illegal transactions, and the person behind it was none other than Marcus Valente. Dante leaned back, rubbing his forehead. What did this mean? Marcus paid Karen. For what? He kept digging, this time focusing on the security cameras. The estate's cameras had been shut off, but Dante had another idea. He contacted the neighbors to the east, the Harrison family, who had their own security system aimed toward the border between the 2 properties. Mr. Harrison agreed to let Dante view the footage without asking many questions, partly out of respect for the Valentes, partly out of fear. And what Dante saw made his blood boil. At 11 that night, The camera captured Karen Mitchell carrying a small bundle wrapped in a blanket toward the back of the kitchen. She moved quickly, checking over her shoulder, the bundle so small it could only be one thing, a baby. She stopped at the large metal dumpsters. She struggled to lift the heavy lid with one hand, then mercilessly dropped the bundle inside. The bundle that contained a 7-month-old infant. She closed the lid and walked back into the house, dusting off her hands as if she had just taken out the trash. Karen did not look back. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. No movement from the dumpster, no cry, nothing. Then Karen turned and walked back into the house, slowly, as if nothing had happened at all. "You bitch," Dante ground out through his teeth. He needed more proof. He went to Eduardo, the gardener who had worked for the Valente family for more than 20 years. The old man trembled when Dante questioned him, but in the end he confessed the truth. "I saw Karen take the baby outside that night," Eduardo said in a whisper. "I was putting tools away in the shed. I saw her carrying something small wrapped in a blanket," Eduardo said in a whisper. "I was putting tools away. I saw her throw it into the dumpster. I heard a thud, but no cry. Nothing. The baby didn't make a sound. That's what scared me most. I got scared. I ran into the shed and hid. I'm sorry. I'm old. I was afraid of getting dragged into it." Dante took the statement, then moved to the next step. He called the doctor who had examined Emma after that night and demanded a more detailed report. And what the doctor said made Dante grip the edge of his chair so hard he thought he might fall. "I found traces of a sedative in the infant's blood," the doctor said over the phone. "A dose that would be mild for an adult but extremely dangerous for a 7-month-old baby. That's why she wasn't crying, why she couldn't alert anyone. She was drugged beforehand. A few more minutes, and that sedative combined with the hypothermia would have stopped her heart." Dante sat in silence. Every piece started clicking into place, forming a sickening picture. Karen was paid by Marcus. Karen drugged the baby and threw her into the dumpster. Karen stood there and watched, waiting for the infant to die in silence. And when Isabella appeared and saved Emma, Karen pinned it on her. This wasn't an attempted murder by a maid. This was a carefully planned killing plot, engineered from inside the Valente family itself. One last question remained. Who shut off the cameras? Dante went back into the security system and dug into the access logs. And when he found the answer, he had to read it 3 times to be sure his eyes weren't lying. The access code used to disable the cameras at exactly 10:30 that night belonged to one person. Not Karen, not any employee. It was Marcus Valente's code. Dante picked up the phone and dialed Adrian. His voice was low and heavy when the line connected. "Boss, I know who shut off the cameras that night." He paused, swallowing hard, "and you're not going to like the answer." The sealed room beneath the Valente estate's basement was cold as a tomb. A single bare bulb swung overhead, throwing restless bands of light and shadow across raw concrete walls. Karen Mitchell sat on a wooden chair in the center of the room, her hands bound tight behind her back, her face drained to the color of death. Adrian walked in, Dante behind him. He said nothing, only dragged a chair into place across from Karen and sat down. His eyes were black pits, empty of feeling. "Mr. Valente," Karen spoke first, her voice shaking as tears began to slide down her cheeks. "I don't know why I'm here. I told the truth. Isabella Reyes tried to kill Emma. I saw it with my own eyes." Adrian stayed silent, only staring at her. That silence was more frightening than any threat. "Please believe me," Karen cried harder, tears and snot smearing across her face. "I love Emma like she's my own. I would never let anything happen to her. Isabella, that maid, she's the guilty one. She threw Emma in the trash. I swear to you." Adrian slowly opened the file Dante had prepared. He placed the first page on the table and turned it toward Karen. "Explain to me," he said, his voice ice cold, "where the $50,000 in your account came from." Karen's face went even paler. She stared at the bank statement, her lips moving, but no sound came out. I don't know," she stammered. "Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone sent it to the wrong account." Adrian laid down the second page. "The money came from a company called Blackstone Holdings LLC, a shell company." Then the third page. "That company belongs to my brother, Marcus Valente." It was as if lightning had struck her. Karen shook her head violently. No, you have it wrong. I don't know Mr. Marcus. I don't know anything about that company." Adrian didn't answer. He pulled out a laptop and played the video, the screen filled with the neighbor's security footage. Karen walking toward the dumpsters with a small bundle in her arms. Karen lifting the lid. Karen dropping the baby inside like a bag of refuse. Karen walking away without looking back. "No!" Karen screamed, shrill and breaking. "That isn't me. The video is edited. Someone edited it to frame me." Adrian shut the video off and placed one more page on the table. "The doctor's report," he said slowly. "Emma had a sedative in her blood that night. Someone gave my 7-month-old daughter a sleeping drug before throwing her into the dumpster. A drug that could have killed her." He leaned forward until his face was inches from Karen's. "You expect me to believe Isabella Reyes, a maid who's only been working here for 6 months, somehow got her hands on a sedative, snuck into my daughter's nursery, drugged a baby, carried her outside, threw her in the dumpster, then pulled her out and held her against her bare chest to keep her alive just to play the hero? For what? To play the hero." His voice rose, each word a knife driven deeper into Karen. "Or is it you? Karen Mitchell, the woman with $50,000 from my brother, the woman on camera throwing my infant daughter away like garbage, the woman who can access Emma's nursery whenever she wants, who is guilty?" Karen collapsed. Her body sagged like a puppet with its strings cut. The crying was no longer performance. It was the raw terror of someone who knew she had reached the end of the road. "Please," she sobbed. "Please spare me. I didn't want to kill her. Marcus told me he only wanted to scare you. He said all I had to do was leave her there for just a few minutes and pull her back out right away, so you'd realize she needed better protection. I didn't know. I didn't think she would almost die. She's just a baby. I didn't think the cold would take her so fast." "Why?" Adrian roared, surging to his feet so fast the chair toppled backward. "Why would my brother want to hurt my daughter?" Karen trembled, tears pouring like a river. He said if there's no Emma, you won't have an heir. He'll be the one to take over everything when you die. He said the Valente empire should have been his from the beginning, but your father chose you only because you're the oldest." She paused, gulping air. "Marcus said Isabella was the perfect prey. A poor girl, no family, no money, no power. No one would believe her. You would kill her, and it would all be over. No one would ever know the truth." Adrian stood there, motionless as stone, but his hand began to shake, not from fear, but from rage building like a volcano about to split the earth. "That bastard," he ground out, his voice the low thunder before a storm. "That bastard almost killed my daughter. My 7-month-old daughter who can't even cry for help. And He slammed his fist into the table, the sound exploding through the room like a gunshot, and I threw the woman who saved my child into jail. I beat her. I let people almost kill her in there for a crime she never committed." He turned to Dante, his eyes burning like open flame. "Where is Marcus?" Dante glanced at his phone, his voice low. "Our sources say he's at the private airfield on the south side of the city. His jet is scheduled to take off in 2 hours. Destination, Mexico." Adrian strode to the weapons cabinet on the wall, unlocked it, and took out the silver-plated pistol his father had left behind. He checked the magazine, then tucked the gun into his waistband. "Get the car ready," he told Dante, his voice steel cold. "I've got a trip to make." The black Rolls-Royce tore through the Chicago night like a hunting beast. Adrian sat in the back seat, his face swallowed by shadow, his eyes burning like 2 live coals. Dante drove, glancing at his boss now and then through the rearview mirror, but he did not dare speak. Midway Executive, a private airfield on the southern edge of the city, was familiar ground for the wealthy who wanted to come and go without being seen. When Adrian's convoy poured onto the runway, Marcus's private jet was already powered up, ready to lift off. But it was too late. 5 black SUVs blocked the strip, and more than 20 of Adrian's gunmen locked the plane inside a ring that could not be broken. Marcus descended the aircraft stairs, surprise flashing across his face before it settled back into that practiced calm. He stood there in a black suit, hair slicked smooth, looking more like a successful businessman than a man who had just plotted to kill his own infant niece. "Brother," Marcus said, a half-smile curling his mouth. "Here to see me off? No need. I'm just taking a little vacation for a few weeks." Adrian stepped out of the car and walked toward him, slow, measured, not speaking until he was less than 3 meters away, close enough to see the beads of sweat on Marcus's brow despite the winter night that cut like a blade. "Karen told everything," Adrian said, his voice low and dangerous. $50,000, the shell company, the sleeping drug, all of it. The smile died on Marcus's lips. He stood in silence for a moment, and then he laughed, a cold, unhinged sound. "So you know," Marcus said, no longer pretending. Fine. I'm tired too. Tired of playing the good little brother for 38 years. Adrian's mind flickered back to childhood. 2 brothers growing up in their father's mansion. Marcus always the one behind, the one measured against him, the one never quite enough. Adrian can do it. Why can't you? Their father had said hundreds of times, and each time Adrian had watched Marcus's eyes darken a little more. You think you deserve everything? Marcus roared, bitterness spilling out raw. This empire, this power, this respect. What did you do to earn it? You're just the oldest son. You were born 2 years before me. That's all. But father chose you, left everything to you, and I had to live my whole life in your shadow. He took a step forward, eyes bloodshot. I worked like a dog. I killed for this empire. I sacrificed everything. And what did you have? You had Emma, a daughter, an heir. And me? I had nothing. When you die, everything goes to that baby. I stay Adrian Valente's brother forever, the shadow standing behind you. Nothing more. So you plan to kill my daughter? Adrian asked, his voice ice cold. A 7-month-old baby? So there would be no heir, so you could take it all? Marcus let out a sharp, ugly little laugh. A perfect plan, right? The baby dies, you have no heir, and that poor Maid becomes the scapegoat. Who would believe an orphan against the Valente family? She rots in prison. You suffer with your loss, and I stand beside you and comfort you like a good brother. Then when you collapse, I take everything. He tilted his head, the smile on his face turning poisonous. It was so easy. A little sedative in her milk, wrap her in a blanket, drop her in the trash. She couldn't even cry for help. She would have just stopped breathing. Quiet, clean, no evidence. His eyes gleamed with something inhuman. But that woman had to find her. Ruined everything. Adrian said nothing. In him, the rage had passed the point of boiling and become something colder, more dangerous, the stillness before the storm breaks. Marcus seemed to feel it. He took a step back, his hand sliding slowly inside his suit jacket. You going to kill me, brother? Marcus asked, his voice trembling. Kill your own blood? I'm considering it, Adrian replied. In the next instant, Marcus yanked a gun from his jacket and aimed it straight at Adrian. But before he could pull the trigger, a shot cracked from behind. The bullet tore through Marcus's wrist, and the pistol flew away. Marcus screamed and dropped to his knees on the runway, blood spilling from the wound. Dante stepped out of the darkness, the gun in his hand still smoking. I had you lined up from the start, Dante said coldly. Boss's order. Adrian walked up and stood over Marcus as he writhed on the ground, looking down at his brother with eyes that held no love at all. Death is too easy for you, Adrian said. I'm not going to kill you, Marcus. I'm going to do worse. He turned to Dante. Exile him. Erase him in the world we live in. From now on he is no longer Valente. No name, no money, no power. If he sets foot back in Chicago, kill him without questions. Marcus looked up, terror filling his face. You can't do that. I'm your blood. You died to me the moment you touched my daughter, Adrian said. She's 7 months old. She can't even call for her father. And you tried to kill her like she was nothing. He turned his back and walked away. He got into the car and left Marcus's screams echoing into the night. On the drive back, Adrian stared at the watch on his wrist. 3 a.m. Isabella was still in jail. She had been there nearly 2 weeks, beaten, humiliated, abandoned by the whole world because of him. Adrian Valente, the feared Chicago Mafia boss who had killed countless enemies without a tremor in his hand, sat in the darkness with his fists clenched tight. And for the first time in his life, he did not know what words could possibly be enough to ask forgiveness from another human being. The iron gate of Cook County Jail swung open with a shriek of metal on metal. Isabella Reyes stepped out, squinting into the morning sunlight she had not seen in 2 weeks. She wore the same old clothes they handed back at release, a wrinkled shirt and jeans worn thin at the knees. But fabric could not hide the bruises blooming along her arms, the long scrape on her neck, or her swollen mouth still marked by what the jail had done to her. She walked slowly, one careful step at a time, as if her legs had forgotten how to move on free ground. The brightness stung her eyes, or maybe it was the tears she had forced down for 14 straight days and nights, finally finding their way out. And then she saw him. Adrian Valente stood beside a gleaming black Rolls-Royce. Gray suit, hair slicked neat, looking more like a polished businessman than the Chicago Mafia boss who had almost destroyed her life. He watched her with a face she could not read. black eyes fixed on her as she came through the gate. Isabella hesitated for a fraction of a second when she recognized him. Her heart sped up, not from fear, but from the fury rising deep in her chest. She remembered his slap. She remembered his hand in her hair. She remembered his cold voice ordering her into the basement. She remembered 2 weeks of hell inside that jail. The beatings, the humiliation, the daily threats that she would be killed before she ever saw a judge. She met his eyes for 1 second, then turned her head and kept walking as if he were nothing more than a streetlight. Isabella. His voice called after her. She did not stop. Isabella, please stop. She kept going. Faster now. Footsteps hurried behind her. Please, just let me speak. His hand touched her shoulder, and that was the last drop. Isabella spun around. Her arm swung up, and the slap cracked loud across the parking lot outside the jail gate. Adrian Valente, the feared Chicago Mafia boss no one dared look in the eye, stood there and took it. He did not dodge. He did not strike back. He did not say a word. You have the nerve to stand here, Isabella shouted, her voice breaking open with every ounce of pain and rage that had been piling up for 2 weeks. You have the nerve to look at me after what you did. She stepped closer and stabbed a finger toward his face. You almost ruined my life. You hit me. You locked me in a dark basement. You handed me to the police for attempted murder for something I didn't do. You let people almost kill me in there. Tears poured down her cheeks, but her voice stayed hard as iron. I saved your daughter. I reached into that filthy dumpster and pulled her out. I held her against my bare chest to keep her alive. A 7-month-old baby who couldn't even cry for help. And you slapped me. You knocked me down. You called me a murderer. She stopped, panting, her chest rising and falling. Do you even know what I went through these 2 weeks? Do you know what they did to me in there? Look. She yanked up her sleeve, exposing the mottled bruises. This is what your bought inmates gave me. This is the price I paid because you believed a snake instead of using your head to think. Adrian did not move. His eyes darkened, but he offered no excuse. He only stood there and took each word as if it were a blade driven into his chest. I know, he finally said, his voice low and hoarse. I know I was wrong. I don't have anything to defend myself with. I just wanted to. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope, holding it out to her. This is compensation for what you suffered. And the cost of your sister's surgery. It's all in here. $250,000. Isabella looked at the envelope, then lifted her gaze to his face. 1 second, 2, then she laughed, bitter and cold. You think money can buy my dignity? She snatched the envelope from his hand and hurled it straight into his face. Bills scattered into the wind, fluttering down like autumn leaves. I don't need your dirty money, Isabella said, her voice trembling but proud. I'm not something you can buy. I don't sell my dignity to anyone, not even the Chicago Mafia boss. She turned her back and walked away without looking back. Adrian stood in the parking lot with money swirling around his shoes, watching the small figure of the woman he had once thought no more than an ant. And for the first time in his life, he felt small. Isabella had gone only a few dozen meters when the phone in her pocket began to ring. She pulled it out, saw Lucia's name, and answered, forcing her voice steady. Sweetheart, I'm out. I'm coming home. Sister. Lucia's voice, weak and broken, cut through, accompanied by the steady beeping of a heart monitor. I'm at the hospital. I fainted this morning, the doctor said. Her voice caught. The doctor said I don't have much time left. Can you come? The phone almost slipped from Isabella's hand. She stood frozen in the road, shaking head to toe, the world around her collapsing into silence. Wait for me, she whispered, her throat tight with grief. I'm coming right now. Isabella ran through the streets of Chicago as if her life depended on it, her heart battering wildly inside her chest, because, in a way, it did. She had no money for a cab, no car, nothing but legs worn down to the bone after 2 weeks in jail, and still she ran, step after step, sweat mixing with tears on a face still bruised and swollen. Cook County Hospital rose ahead of her like a white fortress. She burst through the glass doors, nearly colliding with a nurse, and gasped out a question about the emergency room. She found Lucia on a hospital bed, her small body nearly swallowed by wires and machines, the heart monitor chiming in steady beeps, slow and measured, as if counting down the last seconds of a life. Lucia, Isabella whispered, dropping to her knees beside the bed and gripping her sister's icy hand. I'm here. I'm sorry I wasn't with you. Lucia opened her eyes. dulled by exhaustion, but she still tried to smile. "You're out? Are you hurt?" Even now, her sister worried about Isabella instead of herself. Isabella bit her lip, forcing a sob back down. "I'm fine. You're the one we have to worry about. You're going to be okay. Listen to me." "Miss Reyes." A doctor's voice came from behind. Isabella turned to see a middle-aged man in a white coat, his expression grave, and he motioned her into the hallway. "Your sister's condition is extremely critical," he said plainly, without softness. "Her heart is failing faster than we expected. If she doesn't have surgery within 48 hours, I'm afraid that he did not finish." But Isabella understood. "Do the surgery now," she said, her voice tight and breaking. "Do whatever you have to do." The doctor looked at her with pity. "The cost of the operation is $200,000, Miss Reyes. The hospital needs at least 70% paid up front before we can proceed. $200,000. The number rang inside Isabella's head like a funeral bell. She did not have $200 in her pocket at that moment, so how could she have 200,000? She walked out of the hospital and collapsed onto the steps, her head in her hands. She thought of everyone she knew, every place she could possibly borrow from. She called her former supervisor at the nursing home and was refused. She called a few old co-workers, and no one picked up. She called the bank and was laughed at because she had no collateral. No one lends money to a girl fresh out of jail. No one believes someone branded with attempted murder of a Mafia boss's baby. She was drowning in desperation when a familiar black car pulled up in front of her. Dante Moretti stepped out, an envelope in his hand. "Miss Reyes," he said, his voice low. "I picked this up in the parking lot this morning." Isabella recognized the cash envelope she had thrown into Adrian's face. Her hands shook as she took it, opened it, and counted. $50,000. Only 50,000. The rest had scattered into the wind or been scooped up by strangers. She was still short 150,000. Isabella stared at the money, then stared at her phone. She had one last option. She opened her contacts and found a number she had saved long ago but never dared to call. The number of a loan shark on the south side. A man people whispered would lend to anyone, as long as they were willing to pay with their life if they could not repay. Her finger trembled as she hit call. "Hello?" The voice on the line was cold as ice. "I want to borrow $150,000, Isabella said, her voice breaking apart. "I'll do anything. Please hang up." A familiar voice spoke from behind her. Isabella turned, her heart stalling. Adrian Valente stood there, black suit, face hard as stone, but his eyes were different from the last time she had seen him. "What are you doing here?" Isabella asked, wary. "I paid for your sister's surgery," Adrian said, his voice low. "All of it. The doctor is preparing the operating room." Isabella stood rooted to the ground, unable to believe what she had heard. "What? $200,000, Adrian went on. "Paid in full. Your sister will have surgery within 1 hour." Tears spilled out, beyond her control. Isabella did not know whether she was crying from relief, from anger, or from both at once. "Why?" she asked, her voice strangled. "What do you want from me? You want me to owe you? You want me to be your debt slave for the rest of my life?" Adrian shook his head slowly. "I don't want anything." "Then why?" Isabella almost shouted. "Why do this after everything you did to me?" Adrian was silent for a long time. His gaze dropped to the ground as if searching for the one set of words that would not sound like a lie. "Because it's the right thing," he finally said. "Not so you'll forgive me. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I'm doing it because you deserve to save your sister, because you saved my daughter when no one else did." He lifted his eyes to her, and in them was something Isabella had never seen in this Mafia boss: remorse. "This isn't a debt," Adrian said. "No conditions, no strings. You don't owe me anything." Before Isabella could say another word, a nurse hurried out. "Miss Reyes, we're taking your sister into surgery. Do you want to see her before the operation?" Isabella turned and ran inside without another word to Adrian. She held Lucia's hand one last time before the operating room doors closed, whispering love and promises into her sister's ear. And then she sank to her knees in front of that door, hands clasped, lips moving with silent prayers. "Please, God, save my sister," she whispered. "She's all I have in this world." At the far end of the hallway, Adrian Valente stood in the shadows, watching the small figure of the woman on her knees, and he wanted to step forward. He wanted to say something, but he did not dare, and he simply stood there in silence, like a sinner outside the gates of heaven, knowing he had no right to enter. Isabella looked at Serena Valente standing in front of her, a young woman with straightforward eyes and a sincere bow of the head, and in all of Isabella's 27 years, no one from that kind of wealth had ever lowered themselves to apologize to her like that. "I don't know what to say," Isabella finally replied, guarded. "You came to apologize, but can an apology erase what I went through?" Serena lifted her head, her gaze steady. "No, and I know that. An apology can't erase the bruises on your body, can't give you back those 2 weeks in jail, can't heal what my brother did, but I didn't come here only to say I'm sorry." She paused and took a deep breath. "I came because of Emma." At that name, something sharp tightened in Isabella's chest, and she remembered the baby's still body when she first pulled her from the dumpster, the tiny fist that had gripped her finger when the infant finally stirred, the weak whimper in the rain that night. "How is Emma?" Isabella asked, unable to hide the worry in her voice. "She won't eat," Serena said. "Pain in every word. She can't sleep. She wakes up screaming every night, and no one can calm her down. She cries whenever anyone tries to hold her. She keeps reaching toward the door like she's waiting for someone." Serena held Isabella's eyes. "You're the only person she wants. She needs you." Isabella turned her face away and gripped the edge of Lucia's hospital bed, her sister asleep now, breathing steadily after a successful surgery. "I can't," Isabella said, her voice hardening. "I don't want to set foot in that house again. I don't want to see him. Adrian won't appear," Serena said quickly. "I promise. Just me and Emma. You don't have to see him or speak to him. You only have to come for Emma." Isabella went quiet for a long time, thinking of a 7-month-old baby waiting for her, an infant she had pulled from the filth of a dumpster, a child with no guilt in her tiny body, only fear and a need for someone who made the world feel safe. "All right," Isabella said at last. "I'll come, but only for Emma." The next afternoon, Serena brought Isabella to the Valente estate, and when the car stopped at the gate, Isabella felt her whole body tighten, because this was the place where she had been struck and humiliated and thrown into darkness. But she drew a deep breath and stepped out anyway. Serena led her inside, avoiding Adrian's office wing, and they climbed the stairs and walked down the hallway to Emma's nursery. When the door opened, Isabella heard it first, the thin, exhausted crying of a baby who had been sobbing for too long. Emma lay in her crib, her tiny face red and tear-streaked, her small fists flailing weakly, her voice hoarse from hours of crying. The new nanny stood beside her, looking helpless and defeated. But the moment Emma's eyes found Isabella in the doorway, everything changed. The crying stopped. The baby went still, her red-rimmed eyes locked onto Isabella's face with an intensity no 7-month-old should possess. Then her little arms shot up, reaching, grasping, desperate. A sound escaped her tiny mouth, not quite a word, but close. "Ma, ma, ma." Isabella crossed the room in 3 steps and lifted the baby from the crib, pressing Emma against her chest. The infant immediately buried her face in Isabella's neck, her small body shuddering with the echoes of sobs, her tiny fingers clutching Isabella's shirt so tightly the fabric stretched. "I'm here," Isabella whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry I couldn't come sooner. I'm here now. You're safe." She sank into the rocking chair by the window, cradling Emma close, feeling the baby's frantic heartbeat slowly begin to calm against her own chest. Emma would not let go. Every time Isabella shifted, the baby's grip tightened, as if releasing her would mean losing her forever. "Don't leave," Emma seemed to say with every desperate clutch of her fingers, every press of her face against Isabella's warmth. "Stay with me." Isabella didn't answer, only rocked gently, humming softly. Serena stood in the doorway watching, eyes shining with tears, then quietly slipped away and closed the door so they could have the room to themselves. Outside the window, the sky darkened, and Emma still refused to sleep, her tiny hand wrapped around Isabella's finger, her eyes fighting to stay open, as if closing them would make Isabella disappear. "Do you want me to sing for you?" Isabella asked softly. Emma's eyes flickered at the sound of her voice, and Isabella began to sing a lullaby an old supervisor at the nursing home had taught her when she first started working there, her voice clear and tender, filling the quiet nursery like cool water, beginning with, "Hush, little baby, don't say a word," and then continuing in the same soothing, promise-filled rhythm, offering comfort with imagined gifts and gentle reassurances until the fear loosened its grip. Word by word the sound wrapped around Emma, and little by little the baby's body relaxed, her breathing slowed, her eyelids drifted down, and she fell asleep curled against Isabella's chest, tiny fingers still gripping the collar of Isabella's shirt as if to anchor her in place. Out in the hallway, Adrian stood in the shadows with his back against the wall. He had promised not to appear, yet he could not stop himself from coming close, and Isabella's singing carried through the barely closed door, pure and warm, and for the first time since Bianca died, Adrian felt a strange calm spread through his chest. He stood there in silence, listening to each note, as if it were something he had forgotten for a very long time. Then the singing stopped, and inside the nursery, Emma slept deeply, breathing even and peaceful for the first time in weeks. Isabella looked down at the baby's angel face, and a faint smile touched her lips. Suddenly, Emma shifted in her sleep, her tiny mouth moving. "Ma, Ma," the baby murmured, slurred but unmistakable. "Ma, Ma." Isabella went still. Her heart missed a beat, and she stared down at the infant in her arms, not knowing how to react. Outside the door, Adrian also froze, his hand braced against the wall, eyes fixed on nothing at all, because it was one sound, only one, yet it was enough to steal the breath from both of them. 3 days after the night Isabella sang Emma to sleep, an envelope appeared in Lucia's hospital room. Inside was a handwritten letter from Adrian Valente, along with an employment contract. Isabella read every line, her brows knitting tight. "He wants me to be Emma's official nanny," she told Lucia, suspicion plain in her voice. "5 times what I used to make as a maid. A private apartment on the estate, comprehensive health insurance for both of us." Lucia lay in the hospital bed, recovering far better after the surgery, though she still needed a few more weeks of rest. She took the letter from her sister's hands, skimmed it, then looked up at Isabella. "You're going to refuse." "Of course," Isabella said immediately. "I don't want anything to do with him anymore. I don't want to live in that house." "Isabella," Lucia said gently, eyes carrying a kind of understanding far older than 22. "I know he hurt you, but think carefully. You lost your job. You have a record now, even if you've been cleared, and people won't hire you easily. And me," she stopped, and looked down at her hands. "I still need follow-up visits and monthly medication. Where is the money going to come from?" Isabella fell silent. Lucia was right. She had nothing, no job, no savings, no future. "And Emma," Lucia went on, "you told me she called you Mama, in her sleep. She needs you, Isabella. It's not that Mafia boss who needs you. It's a 7-month-old baby who lost her mother and needs someone who makes her feel safe." Isabella stared out the window where the late afternoon light was fading. She thought of Emma, those wide, hopeful eyes, that tiny hand gripping her finger as if Isabella was the whole world. "You deserve to be compensated," Lucia said. "And this isn't selling your dignity. This is you working, being paid what you're worth, and helping a baby who needs you. There's nothing shameful about that." 2 days later, Isabella arrived at the Valente estate with a small suitcase and a list of conditions as long as her arm. Adrian received her in the living room, his face as cold as ever, but something like relief flickered in his eyes when he saw her. "Before I sign anything," Isabella said, her voice hard as steel, "you need to understand a few things." Adrian nodded and sat across from her. "I'm listening. First, I am not your servant. I am Emma's nanny, and my job is to care for her, not to cater to you or anyone else in this house." "Agreed." "Second, you do not give me orders. If you want something from me, you say please. If I do it, you say thank you. I don't care who you are out there. In this house you treat me like a human being." Adrian frowned for a moment, as if no one had ever dared set terms with him, and then he nodded. "Agreed." "Third, I have the right to refuse any request I consider unreasonable, and you cannot fire me simply because I disagree with you." "Agreed." Isabella studied him for a long beat, searching for deceit in his eyes and finding none. "All right," she said at last. "I accept." The first week passed in strange, almost unreal moments. Isabella moved into a small apartment on the grounds, a cozy space with a bedroom, a living room, and her own kitchen. She spent most of her time with Emma, feeding her, bathing her, singing to her, rocking her through the long afternoons, and Emma, like a wilted flower suddenly given water, began to eat normally again, sleep more peacefully. And slowly, gradually, the bright-eyed smile returned to her angel face. The baby who had screamed for weeks now cooed and gurgled, her tiny hands reaching for Isabella's face, her eyes following Isabella everywhere as if afraid to lose sight of her for even a moment. And Adrian had to learn how to live with the new rules. For the first time in his life, he had to say please to someone who was not a business partner and not an enemy to be bought. "Could you please bring Emma to the dining room?" he said awkwardly, as if the word belonged to a foreign language. Isabella looked at him, surprise flickering across her eyes, And then she nodded. Yes. After dinner, when Isabella took Emma to the nursery, he lingered at the dining room door, stiff and uncertain. Thank you, he managed, his voice strained as if someone had a hand around his throat. Isabella turned back, Emma cradled against her shoulder, and for the first time, a ghost of amusement touched the corner of her mouth. You sound like someone's choking you. Adrian stood there, not knowing what to do with that. It was the first time anyone had dared tease the feared Chicago Mafia boss. In the days that followed, Adrian often watched from a distance as Isabella cared for Emma, watching the way she smiled at the baby, the way she patiently fed her tiny spoonfuls of food, the way she held her close when the infant fussed, and inside him a question began to take shape. One night, after Isabella had finally rocked Emma to sleep and returned to her apartment, a knock sounded at the door. She opened it and found Adrian standing there without his suit or tie, only a black shirt and slacks, looking nothing like the cold, untouchable boss she had come to know. What do you need? Isabella asked, wary. Adrian stood for a moment, as if searching for words. Then he met her eyes, and what she saw there was not arrogance or power. It was fragility. I know you hate me, he said, his voice low and rough. I don't deserve your help. But he stopped and drew a slow breath. Emma reaches for you. She cries when you leave the room. She babbles mama when she sees your face. Do you know why? Because you give her something I never could. Warmth, safety, love, without conditions. He looked down at his hands that had killed, that had hit her, and now looked useless. I'm her father, but I don't know how to be a father. I only know how to command, threaten, punish. I don't know how to hold her without making her cry. I don't know how to comfort her when she fusses. She's only 7 months old, and she already knows I'm not what she needs. He lifted his gaze to Isabella, and in his eyes she saw a man standing at the edge of something like despair. Will you teach me? He asked, his voice almost pleading. Teach me how to be her father. Isabella stood in the doorway, looking at the most powerful man in Chicago standing in front of her with the face of a lost child, his question still hanging in the air, heavy and sincere enough that she didn't know how to answer it. Teach you how to be a father, Isabella repeated, skepticism plain in her voice. You think that's something that can be taught? Adrian didn't respond. He only stood there and waited. Isabella let out a slow breath. Come with me. She led him onto the balcony of her small apartment, where 2 wooden chairs and a little table sat facing the night. Chicago was cold, but not unbearable, and the city lights glittered in the distance like an artificial sea of stars. They sat down in silence, Isabella staring outward while Adrian watched her, waiting. I can't teach you how to be a father, Isabella finally said. There isn't a formula for that, but I can tell you what Emma needs. What? Presence, Isabella said. Not money, not expensive toys, not protection from the whole world, just presence. You're there when she needs you. You hold her when she cries. You learn her sounds, her rhythms, what makes her smile and what makes her fuss. That's all. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked out at the lights and his voice dropped. I don't know how to hold anyone. No one ever taught me. Isabella turned toward him and waited. Bianca, my wife, Adrian began, speaking as if he were describing a stranger. Our marriage was an arrangement. Her father was a business ally of my father's. They set everything up before we were even 20. No love, no choice, only duty. He paused and drew a deep breath. Bianca didn't love me. She feared me. Living with me was like living in a gilded cage, and then she found someone else, someone she thought would save her from me. Who? Isabella asked softly. My enemy, Adrian said, his voice turning cold. Marco Santini, the drug boss on the north side of Chicago. She slept with him for a full year and I didn't know. Then he was assassinated by a rival crew, and Bianca was there when it happened. Isabella fell silent, not knowing what to say. I'm not grieving because I lost her, Adrian said, his voice lower now. I'm not even angry that she betrayed me. I'm only grieving because Emma lost her mother. She was only a few weeks old when Bianca died. She will never remember her mother's face, her mother's voice, her mother's touch. He turned and looked at Isabella, and me. I don't know how to fill that emptiness. I only know how to work, to kill, to build an empire. I don't know how to love. A long silence stretched between them. Then Isabella spoke, her voice gentle but carrying a deep, old ache. I was orphaned when I was 7, she said. My parents died in a car accident. Lucia and I were taken to St. Mary's orphanage. People said it was a good place, but she stopped and swallowed. The matron was a cruel woman. She beat us for anything, sometimes for no reason at all. I was beaten for eating too slowly, for sleeping too late, for looking at her the wrong way, and worst of all, when something went missing, she always blamed me. Her voice shook slightly. I got used to being framed, used to no one believing me, used to being punished for crimes I didn't commit. I thought once I grew up and left that place, things would be different. She turned to Adrian, her eyes deep and painful. But then you happened, and you did everything they did to me for 20 years. You hit me, you locked me up, you accused me, you threw me in jail for something I never did. She drew a breath, trying to keep her voice from breaking. I'm used to being disbelieved, Mr. Valente. But you hurt me the most, because you didn't just refuse to believe me, you wanted to destroy me for it. Adrian sat there, silent, his eyes down on the ground. For the first time in his life, the feared Chicago Mafia boss had nothing to say. No defense, no explanation, only shame, heavy as stone, pressing on his chest. I'm sorry, he finally said, his voice rough. Isabella started to cut him off, but he lifted a hand. No, please let me finish. He looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw something she had never seen in this man, sincerity down to the bone. I'm not apologizing because I want you to forgive me. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I'm apologizing because you deserve to hear it. You deserve to know that I, Adrian Valente, know I was wrong, completely wrong, and I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life. He stood, ready to leave. Thank you for listening, and thank you for what you're doing for Emma. I don't deserve it, but she does. He walked toward the door, but Isabella's voice stopped him. Mr. Valente. He turned back. Isabella looked at him, and for the first time since the night by the dumpster, her eyes did not hold hate, not forgiveness either. Not yet, but it was no longer pure hatred. Something had shifted. Your first lesson in being a father, she said softly. Tomorrow morning you make Emma's bottle yourself, and when she finishes, you hold her. Don't say anything, just hold her. Let her feel your heartbeat. Let her know you're there. Adrian stood there for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right, and when he left, his footsteps were a little lighter, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from his shoulders. 2 weeks passed like a dream Isabella would never have dared imagine. Each morning she woke in her warm apartment, prepared Emma's bottle, and carried her into the main dining room of the estate. But the difference now was that Adrian sat there too. This morning, when Isabella entered with Emma in her arms, she saw Adrian already waiting at the table. In front of him was a warm bottle he had prepared himself, and when Emma spotted her father, her tiny face lit up with recognition, a gurgling coo escaping her lips as she reached toward him with both hands. Adrian stood to take the baby, and what surprised Isabella was how naturally he held her now, with none of the old awkwardness. He settled Emma against his chest and offered the bottle. Here you go, sweetheart, he said, gentler than Isabella had ever heard him. Daddy made it himself. Isabella sat across from them, watching with a strange feeling tightening and softening in her chest at the same time. Because this was no longer the cold Mafia boss she had known. This was a father trying, and she could not deny that it touched something buried in her heart. Emma drank contentedly, one tiny hand wrapped around Adrian's finger, her eyes drifting between his face and Isabella's, as if making sure both of them were still there. When she finished, Adrian lifted her to his shoulder and patted her back gently, a gesture Isabella had taught him just days ago. And when Emma let out a small burp, he actually smiled. You have a good teacher, Adrian said, his eyes brushing Isabella's for a heartbeat before he looked away. An engine sounded out in the courtyard. Minutes later, Serena appeared in the dining room doorway, her college backpack slung over one shoulder, her face bright. I'm home, the 19-year-old announced as she came in, and when she saw her brother feeding Emma while Isabella sat across from them, her eyes lit with unhidden joy. Wow, Serena said, dropping into a seat beside Isabella. I leave for 2 weeks, and the whole house changes. Adrian is actually eating breakfast with Emma. No phone, no Dante reporting work. Do you want me to throw you out? Adrian asked, but his voice held none of its usual threat. Serena laughed and leaned close to whisper into Isabella's ear. What kind of magic did you do on him? I've never seen him like this. Isabella didn't answer, only smiled. That afternoon, another visitor came. Lucia arrived, discharged from the hospital, but still moving slowly. The 22-year-old stepped into the estate timidly, eyes wide as she took it all in. Isabella. It's so huge, Lucia whispered, as Isabella walked her through the halls. You really live here? Isabella introduced Lucia to Serena, and the two young women became close almost instantly, as if they had known each other for years. They sat in the garden talking and laughing, while Isabella tended Emma nearby, rocking her in a stroller under the shade of an old oak tree, and seeing her sister safe and bright again gave Isabella a simple happiness she had forgotten existed. That night the rain came. Not a normal rain, but a sudden violent storm, thunder and lightning tearing open the black sky, and then the power went out and the entire estate fell into darkness. Emma's scream ripped through it all, a high-pitched, terrified wail that cut through the thunder like a knife. Isabella ran from her apartment toward Emma's nursery. Heart pounding, she shoved the door open, and in the flash of lightning she saw Adrian arriving from another direction at the same moment. Together they rushed to Emma's crib. The baby was thrashing, her tiny face red and tear-streaked, her cries growing more frantic with each crash of thunder. Isabella lifted her immediately, pressing her close, while Adrian stood beside them, his hand hovering protectively over the baby's back. It's okay, Isabella soothed, rocking Emma gently. It's just rain. Daddy and Isabella are here. But Emma would not stop crying. Her small body shook with each sob, and she kept reaching for something, for someone, for comfort she could not find. Let me, Adrian said softly, and Isabella looked at him with surprise. She carefully transferred Emma into his arms, and Adrian held his daughter against his chest, one large hand cradling her head, the other supporting her tiny body. He began to hum low and rough and uncertain, but it was a lullaby, or something close to it. And slowly, impossibly, Emma's cries began to quiet. In the darkness, Isabella watched them, and something shifted in her chest. Adrian's eyes found hers over the baby's head, and in the flash of lightning she saw they were not cold anymore. Something deep and warm lived in that look, something that made her heart race. Their hands brushed as they both reached to adjust Emma's blanket. A jolt shot through Isabella when her skin touched his, and she heard Adrian's breath catch for a beat. For one suspended moment neither of them moved. Then they both pulled back as if burned. I'm sorry, Adrian said, his voice rough. No, I'm sorry, Isabella answered, her cheeks suddenly hot even though the room was cold. They stood together in silence, Emma finally asleep between them, but Isabella could feel his presence like a warm flame, and she knew he felt the same. When Emma was settled back in her crib, Adrian stepped back first. Thank you, he said, his voice turning stiff again, as if he were trying to rebuild a wall that had cracked. I'll go check the generator. He left quickly, as if he were running from something. Isabella stayed by Emma's crib, her pulse still wild. She didn't understand what had just happened. No, she did understand. She just didn't want to admit it. In the days that followed, Adrian kept his distance. He still fed Emma breakfast and still followed Isabella's lessons, but he no longer met Isabella's eyes. There were no late-night conversations on the balcony, no moments where they accidentally stood too close, and Isabella told herself this was good. She shouldn't feel anything for this man. He had almost ruined her life. He was a mafia boss. He was, but deep down she knew something had shifted and she wasn't sure she could go back to how things were before. On the 5th night after the storm, a knock sounded. Isabella opened the door, thinking it would be Adrian, but it was Dante, his face pale and tense. Miss Reyes, where is the boss? I don't know. What is it? Dante didn't answer. He hurried away to find Adrian, and Isabella followed, dread rising in her chest. She found them in Adrian's office, Dante speaking with a grim urgency. When Isabella stepped inside, both men turned to look at her. What is it? Isabella asked. Adrian looked at her, jaw clenched, his eyes dark as a sky before a storm. Marcus, he said, forcing each word through his teeth. He escaped exile, and he's coming back to Chicago. The Valente estate became a fortress in less than 24 hours. Adrian pulling every string he had, tripling the number of bodyguards, installing more security cameras in every corner, and ordering that no one leave the grounds without his permission, while Isabella went to check on Emma's nursery, only to find the crib empty and the window shattered. Panic exploded in her chest. She screamed for Adrian, her voice tearing through the silent hallway. Chaos erupted. Guards swarmed the house, but the nursery was empty. While Adrian was barking orders to seal the perimeter, Isabella's phone vibrated in her pocket. She froze, staring at the screen. A message from an unknown number. A video link. With shaking fingers, she pressed it. The screen lit up, and her heart seemed to stop. Lucia was there, tied to a chair, and next to her, in a small, portable crib, was Emma, the baby's face red from crying, her tiny fists flailing weakly. Marcus Valente moved into view. "Hello, Isabella." "Hello, brother. I have a full house tonight." He smirked, looking into the lens. "I hear the surgery went very well. But you know, hearts are fragile. All it takes is a little too much stress." He lifted a knife, letting the blade slide lightly across Lucia's arm. "You want them back?" Marcus laughed. "The heir and the sister. 2 lives. Here is the deal. Come alone. Bring no one. Do not tell my brother. If I see anyone else, they die. You come, and you take her place in this chair." He walked over to the crib and looked down at Emma with cold disgust. "As for this one, she's been crying for hours. Annoying little thing. Keeps reaching for someone who isn't here." He smiled cruelly. "Maybe she's calling for her new mommy." Then he gave an address to an abandoned warehouse on the southern outskirts of Chicago. "You have 2 hours. If I see anyone other than you, the girl dies. If you call the police, the girl dies. If you do not come," he lifted the knife to Lucia's throat. "You understand." The video ended, leaving Isabella standing frozen in the room, her phone nearly slipping from her hand, unable to breathe, unable to think, seeing only Lucia's tear-soaked face, the red mark on her arm, Emma's desperate cries, the knife at her sister's throat. And she had to go. She had to save them. So without another thought, Isabella bolted from the room and ran down the stairs. She would call a cab. She would go to that address. She would trade her life for her sister's and for Emma's. She did not care what happened to her because Lucia and that baby were everything. But as she reached the front door, a hand clamped around her arm and yanked her back. "Where are you going?" Adrian stood there, his eyes sharp and cold, yet threaded with worry, and Isabella fought him. "Let me go." But he did not release her, and she sobbed through the panic. "I have to go." He took Lucia. "He's going to kill her." And Adrian said, low and steady, "I know. Dante traced your phone signal. We saw the video." And Isabella screamed again, tears spilling without control. "Then let me go. I have to get there." He said, "If I don't come, he'll kill Lucia." And Adrian's face was white as a sheet, his hands shaking for the first time. "He has Emma," he whispered, a sound of pure devastation. "He took my baby girl. She's only 7 months old. She doesn't understand what's happening. She must be so scared." Then his voice hardened into something terrifying. "We are going. I will burn this city to the ground to get them back." He grabbed Isabella's shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "Marcus has no intention of letting your sister go. He'll kill you, then kill her, then send the video to me. That's his real plan." And Isabella shattered against him, pounding his chest. "I don't care. That's my sister, the only person I have in this world. I can't let her die. I'd rather die in her place." And Adrian stood there and took every blow, not dodging, not striking back, letting her hit him until she collapsed into sobs. And then he lowered himself to her eye level, his hands holding her shoulders with a gentleness that was firm, and his voice was deeper and warmer than she had ever heard from him. "Listen to me. I will not let you die, and I will not let your sister die. I promise." And she cried, broken. "What can you promise? You don't understand. Lucia is the only one I have. If she dies, I have nothing." And Adrian looked straight into her eyes, and whatever she saw there stopped her tears mid-breath. "Not anymore," he said, solid as an oath. "You have us. You have Emma. You have Serena. You have me. You are not alone anymore, Isabella, and I will not let anyone take anyone from you." And it was the first time he had said her name, not Miss Reyes, not ma'am, but Isabella. And the way he said it, as if it were the most precious thing left on earth, made her throat tighten. Then Adrian rose and turned to Dante waiting at the door, the old authority sliding back into his voice. "Mobilize everything. Find Marcus. Surround the warehouse. I want no rat slipping out." And Dante asked, "How does the boss want him handled?" And Adrian stared out the window, jaw clenched, eyes dark as storm night. "I want him alive," he said, each word ground through his teeth, "so I can kill him myself." The black convoy tore through the Chicago night like hunting beasts. 5 sport utility vehicles, 20 of the Valente Empire's most battle-tested gunmen, and 1 Mafia boss with murder in his eyes, Dante at the wheel of the lead car with Adrian beside him. his face carved from cold stone while his gaze burned with hatred, and in the back seat, despite every objection, Isabella sat with the pistol Adrian had taught her to use over the past week. "You should not be coming," Adrian said for the third time since they got in. "It is too dangerous." "My sister is in there," Isabella answered, her voice hard as steel. "And Emma. You cannot stop me." Adrian said nothing after that, because he understood that stubbornness. He would have done the same if Emma were the one being held, and she was. The abandoned warehouse lay on the southern outskirts of Chicago, in an old industrial zone dead for decades, surrounded by collapsed buildings, weeds grown as high as a person's head, and darkness thick as ink, the perfect place to hide hostages. The convoy stopped about 300 meters away. Adrian signaled his men to fan out and seal the area from every direction. Then he looked at Isabella, his voice dropping. "Stay in the car. Wait until we control the situation." Isabella was about to argue, but something in Adrian's eyes made her stop. Not an order this time, but a plea. "Please," he said, for the first time using the word with her as if it belonged naturally in his mouth. "I cannot focus if I have to worry about you." Isabella nodded, even though everything inside her was boiling. Adrian and Dante led the entry team, moving through the dark like ghosts, approaching from the rear where a rusted steel door waited. Dante signaling as two gunmen stepped forward to break the lock, the door opening with a shriek of metal, and then hell began. Gunfire ripped the night apart. Marcus's men were waiting inside, and the shootout exploded instantly, bullets slicing through air, screams, shattering glass, metal slamming into metal. Adrian moving like a panther, swift and lethal, dropping two men before they could even react, and then driving deeper into the warehouse. Dante covering the rear with 3 more shooters clearing the way. Inside, the warehouse was black as pitch, lit only by a few weak oil lamps that trembled and threw sickly light. Adrian pushing forward, eyes scanning every pocket of shadow, gun ready, and then he saw them. A chair sat in the middle of the space, Lucia bound to it, her mouth sealed with tape, and beside her, on the cold concrete floor, was a small portable crib. Inside it, Emma lay wrapped in a thin blanket, her face red and tear-streaked, her cries reduced to weak, exhausted whimpers. She had been crying for so long she had nearly lost her voice. Adrian rushed to his daughter while Isabella sprinted to Lucia. Adrian lifted Emma from the crib, cradling her against his chest, and the baby immediately buried her face in his neck, her tiny body shaking with silent sobs, her small fingers clutching his shirt with desperate strength. "I've got you," Adrian whispered, his voice cracking. "Daddy's here. You're safe." Meanwhile, Isabella dropped to her knees beside Lucia, hands tied, mouth sealed with tape, eyes wide with terror. Isabella tore the tape from her mouth. "You are safe," she said fast, cutting the ropes. "Are you hurt? Can you stand?" "Isabella," Lucia gasped. "The baby is the baby okay?" "She's okay. Adrian has her. Can you stand?" Lucia nodded and tried to rise on shaking legs, Isabella steadying her, turning to get her out. And that was when she heard footsteps behind her and felt the cold press of a gun barrel against the back of her head. "Hello, Isabella," Marcus's voice came, cold and delighted. "And hello, big brother. What a touching reunion." Adrian went still. Emma clutched protectively against his chest, not daring to move because at this range Marcus could not miss. "Put the baby down," Marcus ordered. "Turn around slowly, and if you even think about trying something, I will put a bullet through your skull and then through that crying little thing in your arms." Adrian's jaw clenched, but he had no choice. He carefully laid Emma back in the crib, the baby immediately starting to wail again at the loss of contact, her tiny arms reaching up for him. He turned to face his brother. Marcus stood there, paler than the last time they met, his wrist still wrapped from the wound Dante had put in it, but the gun in his hand was steady, aimed at Adrian's head without a tremor. "In the end, I win," Marcus laughed, wild and unhinged. "You thought you could exile me, erase me, and I would disappear. You thought I would run like a kicked dog." He stepped closer, the muzzle driving into Adrian's forehead. "I have waited for this moment for 38 years, the moment I see you on your knees at my feet, begging for your life. And then you will watch me smother that baby with my own hands. No heir, no legacy, just you, dying with nothing. You will not leave here alive," Adrian said, his voice ice cold. "My men have this place surrounded." "I know," Marcus said, "but I do not need to leave. I only need to watch you die first." He cocked the gun, a sharp click in the suffocating quiet. "Goodbye, big brother." Drop the gun. A voice spoke from behind, and Marcus froze. He turned his head, and what he saw stopped him cold. Isabella stood there less than 5 meters away, her pistol aimed straight at his head, and she did not know when she had run in, did not know how she had made it through the firefight outside. She only knew that when she heard Marcus say goodbye, her legs had moved on their own. "You," Marcus sneered. "What are you going to do? Shoot me?" "I said drop the gun," Isabella repeated, her voice shaking while her hands stayed steady as rock, because Adrian had taught her how to hold it, how to aim, how to control her breathing, how to squeeze the trigger. "If you do not, I will shoot." Marcus stared at her, then laughed, contempt thick in it, mocking and cruel. "You will not shoot," he said. "You are the good one, remember. You are the girl who reached into a dumpster to save a baby. You are the girl who forgave the man who almost ruined your life. You do not have it in you to kill." He turned back to Adrian, pointing the gun at him again, treating Isabella like she was nothing. "Stand there and watch. Watch me kill my brother. Then I will kill you. Kill your sister. Smother that screaming infant. Kill everyone you love." "Isabella, run!" Adrian shouted. But Isabella did not run. She remembered the nights in jail, the fists of other inmates, the tear-soaked face of Lucia in that video, Emma's desperate cries. She remembered everything Marcus had done, not only to her but to Emma, to Adrian, to all of them. And she was not a good person. She was someone who would do anything to protect the people she loved. Isabella squeezed the trigger. The gunshot exploded through the warehouse like thunder. The bullet tore into Marcus's right shoulder, knocking him backward, the pistol flying from his hand. Blood sprayed, dark and wet against the gray concrete. Marcus screamed and hit the floor hard. One hand clamped over the wound as he gritted out, You bitch," and tried to crawl toward the gun where it had skidded. But Adrian was faster. He surged forward, kicked the weapon farther away, then planted his boot between Marcus's shoulder blades and drove him down. "Don't move," Adrian snarled, his voice the sound of a storm. Isabella stood there with her pistol still aimed forward, her whole body trembling like a leaf in high wind, unable to believe what she had just done. Because she had shot someone, she had actually shot someone, and the world felt unreal around the edges. Behind her, Emma's cries had shifted, no longer the desperate wails of terror, but something different. The baby had heard Isabella's voice, and now she was reaching toward her, her small arms stretching out, her cries turning to urgent, pleading sounds. Isabella turned, dropped the gun, and scooped Emma into her arms. The baby immediately quieted, pressing her face into Isabella's neck, her tiny body still shaking but no longer screaming. In the distance, sirens began to wail, growing louder as they closed in. Dante had called the police the moment the firefight started, partly to make sure Marcus would be taken by the law this time, with no chance of slipping away like before. Minutes later, the warehouse flooded with the red and blue wash of patrol lights. Dozens of officers poured inside with weapons drawn, sealing off the area, and at the front of them was a familiar face. Detective Maria Santos stepped into the warehouse, her sharp eyes taking in the scene in a single sweep. Marcus on the floor bleeding from the shoulder, Adrian standing over him, Isabella holding a trembling baby in her arms. "Miss Reyes," Detective Santos said, calm but firm. "Is the baby injured?" "No," Isabella whispered, her voice breaking. "She's scared. But she's okay. Put the weapon down," Detective Santos said, nodding toward the pistol on the floor. "Slowly. No one is going to shoot you." An officer came to collect the weapon while others snapped cuffs on Marcus and lifted him onto a stretcher. "We need an ambulance," someone shouted. "Two injured." Lucia was brought out on another stretcher. She was conscious, only suffering a few shallow cuts and dehydration from being held too long. And when her stretcher passed Isabella, she reached out and grabbed her sister's hand. "Isabella," Lucia cried, her voice thin and shaking. "You saved me. You saved the baby." Isabella dropped to her knees beside her. Emma still clutched against her chest, tears pouring. "Are you okay? Does anything hurt?" "I'm okay," Lucia whispered. "I was just scared. But you came. You always come." They wheeled Lucia toward the ambulance, and Isabella tried to follow, but Detective Santos stopped her. "Miss Reyes, I need to speak with you for a moment." Isabella's heart tightened. She had shot a man. Even if it was defense, even if it was to save someone, she could still be charged. She could be sent back to jail. But what Detective Santos said next made Isabella go still. With Karen Mitchell's statement and the new evidence of Marcus Valente's plot, Detective Santos said, her tone formal, "I'm glad to tell you that all previous charges against you have been fully dismissed. Your record will be cleared. As for tonight, you acted within lawful self-defense in protection of multiple lives, including an infant. No charges will be filed." Isabella stood there, unable to believe she had heard it. Cleared. Clean. The nightmare that had dragged across the last months of her life had finally ended. Detective Santos gave her a curt nod and turned away to direct the other officers. Around Isabella, people rushed in every direction, the ambulance pulling out, officers collecting evidence, medics bandaging the wounded, but Isabella could not move. She stood in the middle of the chaos as if her feet had been nailed to the floor. Emma still pressed against her chest, the baby's breathing finally evening out into exhausted sleep. And then, as the adrenaline drained out of her body, everything crashed in at once. She began to shake. Her whole body shook uncontrollably, as if live current were running through her bones. Her knees buckled and she started to fold, but she couldn't fall. She had Emma. She had to protect Emma. "I shot someone," she whispered, her voice breaking into fragments. "I shot someone. And then, strong hands steadied her, one arm wrapping around her waist, another hand coming to rest protectively on Emma's back. "Adrian, it's okay," he said, his voice low and warm in her ear. "You're okay. You did the right thing. I shot. You saved me." Adrian cut in, his arm tightening around her. "You saved Lucia. You saved Emma. You stopped him from killing all of us. You have nothing to regret," Isabella cried, tears streaming down her face while Emma slept against her chest, and Adrian held them both there in the middle of the chaos, not caring about the looks from the officers around them, not caring about anything except the woman coming apart in his arms and the daughter safe between them. This was not an embrace of simple gratitude, not an embrace of ordinary comfort. This was the embrace of two people who had walked through hell and survived, the embrace of two people who needed each other more than anything else in the world, the embrace of a family that had almost been destroyed and was now, somehow, still standing. They stood like that for what felt like forever, until the noise around them softened, until Isabella's tears began to run dry, until her heartbeat finally started to steady again, until Emma shifted in her sleep and let out a soft, content sigh. Then Adrian bent close, his mouth near her ear, and he whispered, rough with feeling, "Don't leave. We need you." Isabella did not answer. She didn't know what words could hold everything between them, the grief, the harm, the wounds, the forgiveness still unfinished, but she did not let go either. She tightened her grip on Emma, leaned into Adrian's chest, and let herself be held for the first time in a very, very long time. A week had passed since the nightmare at the warehouse. Marcus was in custody now, awaiting trial on a long list of charges: kidnapping, conspiracy to commit murder, even assault against an infant, and this time he would not slip away. Lucia was recovering well, and, at Serena's invitation, had moved in temporarily at the Valente estate. Emma's bright babbling had returned, the night terrors fading night by night, her tiny face lighting up every time she saw Isabella walk into the room. Everything seemed to be settling back into something like normal, and yet between Adrian and Isabella the air had changed completely. They no longer avoided each other the way they once had, but they also did not dare step too close, and every time their eyes met they both looked away too quickly, the memory of that embrace still branded into them like a burn that would not fade. Isabella knew she could not stay. She had thought about it for nights on end, lying awake in the warm apartment, staring at the ceiling and asking herself what she was doing. She loved Emma. There was no denying that, and she had begun to feel something for Adrian too, even if she did not want to admit it. But his world was not her world, guns and violence and enemies hiding in the dark, and she could not live like that for the rest of her life. That morning Isabella packed. Not much, only a small suitcase with a few changes of clothes and the handful of keepsakes she owned. She had told Lucia her decision, and even though her sister did not agree, Isabella would not bend. She wrote a letter for Emma, to be read to her someday when she was old enough to understand, explaining that Isabella had to go, but would always love her, because she did not know if she had the courage to say goodbye face to face. She had barely stepped out of her apartment when Adrian was there, as if he had been waiting. "Where are you going?" he asked, his eyes dropping to the suitcase in her hand. Isabella took a deep breath. "I'm leaving, Mr. Valente. I left my resignation on the table." "Why?" "Because I don't belong in your world," Isabella said, forcing her voice steady even as her heart hammered out of control. "I'm an ordinary woman. I want an ordinary life. No guns, no enemies, no fear that tomorrow someone will try to kill the people I love again." She held his gaze. "You've repaid me enough. Lucia is alive. My name is cleared. We're even." She stepped past him, but Adrian's voice stopped her. "Isabella." She turned back, and what she saw pinned her in place. Adrian Valente, the feared Chicago Mafia boss no one dared look in the eye, was down on his knees in front of her, kneeling in the hallway, in front of a woman who had once been nothing more than a maid in his house. "What are you doing?" Isabella gasped, panicked. "Get up. If someone sees you, I don't care who sees," Adrian said, looking up at her with a sincerity she had never seen in anyone. "I know I don't deserve it. I know what I did to you is unforgivable. I hit you. I locked you up. I almost destroyed your life because of my blindness and my pride." He paused and drew a breath as if he had to gather courage to go on. "But you changed me. You taught me how to be a father. You gave Emma what I never could. You saved my life when I didn't deserve saving. And every day I'm near you, I become a better man." He took her hand, that rough, calloused hand of a man who had killed, now trembling like a child's. "Please give me a chance to make it right. Not once, not for a year, but for the rest of my life. I want to spend my life making it up to you, proving I can become the kind of man who deserves you." Isabella stood there as tears rose in spite of her, looking down at the man on his knees, and inside her two forces battled fiercely. One was the past, the bruises, the jail nights, the fear and humiliation, and the other was the present, that honest look, the warmth of his arms that night at the warehouse, the feeling of being needed, of being loved, of being valued. "Sister." Lucia's voice came from behind. Isabella turned and saw her standing with Serena, both of them watching with hope in their eyes. "You deserve to be happy," Lucia said. "You spent your whole life sacrificing for me. Now it's time you live for yourself." "Miss Isabella," Serena added, her voice sincere. "My brother isn't perfect. He's done a lot of wrong. But I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. You changed him. Please give him a chance." Isabella looked down at Adrian, still kneeling there, his eyes holding all the vulnerability he had never allowed anyone else to see. And she spoke slowly, her voice trembling. "If I stay, I have one condition, anything. You have to give up violence," Isabella said, firm now. "No more killing, no more gang wars, no more things that put this family in danger. You have to turn this empire into legal business. I don't want to live with the fear that one day Emma will lose her father, or that I will lose." She stopped before she could finish, but Adrian understood. "For you, I will do anything," he said without hesitation. "I will change everything. I will rebuild from the ground up. I will become the man you and Emma deserve." Isabella searched his eyes for deception, for any reason to refuse, and found none. Only truth, only longing, only a love she never believed she would receive. She let the suitcase slip from her hand. "Get up," she whispered, choked with tears. Adrian rose, taller than her by nearly a head. Yet in that moment he looked like a man being saved. He lifted his hand and touched her cheek, his fingers trembling. "Thank you," he breathed, and then he leaned down, and their mouths met, the first kiss, gentle and sweet, and full of everything they could not say. Isabella closed her eyes and let herself fall into it, letting the past fade, letting the pain loosen, leaving only the present and the man holding her. From down the hallway came a sound, Emma's excited babbling, growing louder as the nanny carried her toward them. The moment Emma saw Isabella, her whole face lit up, her tiny arms reaching out, her voice rising in that familiar, precious sound. "Ma, ma, ma, ma." The nanny brought her close, and Isabella took her, feeling Emma's small body settle against her chest with a contented sigh, the baby's fingers immediately tangling in Isabella's hair. Adrian wrapped his arms around both of them, and for a moment the three of them stood there in the hallway, holding each other. "We're a family now," Adrian said softly, looking at Isabella with eyes full of wonder. "Aren't we?" Isabella looked down at Emma, then looked at Adrian, and for the first time in her life she felt like she belonged somewhere. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with feeling. "We're a family now." 18 months later, the Valente estate was no longer the cold fortress of Chicago's infamous Mafia boss. Its ashen walls repainted a warm cream, fresh flowers blooming in the garden where barbed wire fences and dense security cameras once dominated, and the bright laughter of a toddler echoing through the hallways. chasing away the gloom that had hung over the place for years. Adrian Valente had kept his promise. 80% of his empire converted into legitimate business. From real estate to a chain of high-end restaurants and technology investment projects, with the remainder in the midst of restructuring. Dante was still his right hand, but now, instead of holding a gun, he held folders and managed business projects. Chicago's underworld whispered about the transformation of Boss Valente, but no one dared say it to his face, some calling him weak until they fell silent the moment they realized Adrian still had more than enough power to protect his family. He simply no longer wanted to use violence. Today was the most special day of Isabella Reyes's life. She stood before the mirror in a pure white wedding gown, simple yet elegant, chosen by Serena herself, her black hair pinned up and dotted with a few small white blossoms. No expensive jewelry, only the cheap bracelet Lucia had given her years ago, the bracelet Isabella had believed lost forever when she was thrown into jail. Lucia stood beside her with tears in her eyes. "You're so beautiful," she said, voice thick with emotion. "If Mom and Dad could see you now, they would be so proud." Isabella hugged her sister, feeling Lucia's healthy heart beating steadily beneath her blouse, remembering how, 1 year earlier, she thought she would lose her, and now Lucia stood here beautiful and full of life, cheeks blushing whenever she mentioned Dr. Ryan, the man who had operated to save her and who was now dating her. The wedding ceremony was held in the back garden, beneath the old oak tree where Isabella often sat with Emma, with no hundreds of guests, no press, no show, only family and the closest people. Dante stood beside Adrian as best man. Serena served as Isabella's maid of honor. Lucia sat in the front row, fingers tightly laced with Dr. Ryan's hand, and Emma, now 2 years old in a fluffy pink dress, toddled down the aisle clutching a small basket of petals, scattering them with clumsy, joyful abandon, occasionally stopping to pick one up and examine it before dropping it again. When Isabella stepped out from the back door, Adrian waited at the end of the path and forgot how to breathe, because the woman walking toward him was no longer the muddy, shivering maid from that night in the rain, no longer the battered girl in a county jail. This was his Isabella, radiant and strong, the woman who saved his daughter, saved his soul, and changed everything he thought he knew about himself. Their vows were spoken beneath birdsong and a gentle breeze, and when Adrian kissed his bride, Emma squealed and clapped her tiny hands, then held up her arms and called out, "Mama! Dada! Up! Up! Mama!" The name Emma had been calling Isabella for months now, ever since her first real word had tumbled out of her mouth one morning at breakfast, and Isabella had cried for an hour afterward, but they were tears of happiness. Adrian scooped Emma up with one arm while keeping the other around Isabella, and the three of them stood there together, a family forged not by blood but by choice, by sacrifice, by love. The reception after the ceremony was intimate and filled with laughter. Serena gave a moving speech about the woman who changed her brother and brought happiness to the whole family. The 20-year-old newly graduated from law school with top honors, declaring she would devote her career to protecting the vulnerable, people like Isabella who had once been treated unjustly with no one standing on their side. In the middle of the celebration, Isabella rose and tapped her glass lightly to draw everyone's attention. "I have an announcement," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, looking at Adrian, then down at Emma, sitting on her father's lap, playing with his tie. "Emma, you're going to have a baby brother or sister." The entire garden erupted in cheers. Emma looked around with wide, curious eyes, not quite understanding but catching the excitement. "Baby?" she repeated, pointing at Isabella's belly. "Baby?" "Yes, sweetheart," Isabella said, kneeling down to her level. "A baby. You're going to be a big sister." Emma's face split into the brightest grin, and she leaned forward to press a sloppy kiss against Isabella's stomach. "Baby," she declared with satisfaction. Adrian stood stunned for a moment, then lunged forward to hold his wife, his eyes wet, and for the first time in his life he did not try to hide his tears in front of anyone. "Thank you," he whispered into Isabella's ear. "Thank you for everything." That evening, after the guests had gone and Emma slept soundly after a long day, Isabella walked alone into the back garden and stopped by the garden path near where the old bins used to stand. The area was now filled with blooming hydrangeas, no longer the cold, dark corner it had been on that fateful night nearly 2 years ago. She remembered the instant she lifted the lid, remembered the terrifying stillness of the baby lying among the refuse, remembered the infant's weak heartbeat fluttering against her chest as she pressed Emma's tiny body against her own skin and begged life to return. She also remembered Adrian's slap, the night in the basement, the 2 weeks of hell in jail. And strangely, those painful memories no longer hurt her now. They were simply part of the road that brought her here, to the family she never dared dream she could have. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind, Adrian's familiar warmth covering her like a blanket. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his chin resting on her shoulder. "I'm thinking about that night," Isabella answered. "The night I saved Emma." "You changed everything," Adrian said, voice low and full of gratitude. "Without you, I would still be that monster, living in darkness and not knowing what love is." Isabella turned in his arms and looked up at the man who had gone from enemy to husband. "No," she smiled. "I just did the right thing. I saw a baby who needed saving, and I saved her. I didn't think about consequences or rewards. I only did what my heart told me." She placed a hand on her belly, where a small life was growing day by day, and life gave me a reward bigger than anything I ever dared to imagine. Adrian kissed her forehead, then her lips, then knelt to kiss her belly. "Daddy loves you," he whispered to the unborn baby. "Daddy loves your mother, and Daddy will spend his whole life protecting this family." From the house, Emma's voice rang out, not words exactly, but the unmistakable sound of a toddler who had woken up and wanted attention. "Mama! Dada!" Isabella and Adrian looked at each other and laughed. "The princess is calling," Isabella said. "Let's go," Adrian answered, taking his wife's hand and leading her back toward the warmly lit house. And as they walked, the garden lights glittered under the moon as if it were smiling, blessing this small family overflowing with love. Sometimes, the people the world throws away are the ones with the greatest hearts. Isabella did not save Emma to be repaid. She saved her because it was what she had always wished someone would do for her when she was small, when she was a lonely orphan in a cold children's home. And in the end, after all the pain and trials, she found the family she had deserved for a long time. This story teaches us that kindness is never wasted. Even when doing the right thing brings temporary suffering, the universe will find a way to repay a compassionate heart. It also reminds us that people can change. Adrian was once cruel and blind, but Isabella's love and patience helped him reclaim the humanity he had lost. And most of all, the story shows that family is not always the people who share your blood. Family is the people who choose to love one another, protect one another, and stand together through every storm. My dear friends, this is where the story ends. Thank you for staying with Isabella and Adrian through this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, please press the like button and subscribe to our channel so you do not miss the compelling stories we share every day. Please share this video with the people you love, the people who need to be reminded that life always offers a second chance to those who deserve it. We would truly love to hear what you feel, from the deepest place in your heart. What do you think about this story? Have you ever faced a moment in life that forced you to struggle between doing the right thing and protecting yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every comment, and we value every one of your opinions. Wishing everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peaceful days. Keep your faith in kindness, because sometimes one small act can change an entire life. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.